summer of 1943. Europe's golden grain fields bore the scorching weight of a relentless retreat, their once lustrous hues transformed to embers, trampled underfoot by marching boots and the grinding treads of military vehicles. From these scorched plains, where the very air was thick with the lingering scent of gunpowder and steel, a procession of captives began their somber journey toward an uncertain future. Among this solemn line were women who had previously wielded pens, bandages, and typewriters with far greater familiarity than any firearm. Their uniforms, though still bearing the crisp, precise creases of bureaucratic order, could not conceal the profound weariness etched into their eyes, a testament to the unending conflict. They had been warned that captivity would bring starvation, chains, and possibly far worse. Yet, with each step into the unknown, an odd hollowness settled within them, as if the very ground beneath their feet was subtly shifting, leading them toward a reality that remained shrouded in mystery. Lisa-Lotte Bauer kept her gaze fixed resolutely ahead, the tight plait at the nape of her neck prickling with perspiration. She was 22 years old. Trained as a Red Cross nurse, she had been abruptly torn from the quiet sanctuary of hospitals and thrust into the heart of overwhelming chaos. Tending to wounds that seemed to defy all efforts to heal, she moved with a deliberate grace, though her hands were tightly clenched within her pockets, her fingernails digging crescent moons into her palms. To her right walked Anna Hoffman, nearly a decade her senior, who had once meticulously transcribed speeches within the grand, echoing marble halls of Berlin. Anna's lips were pressed into a firm, unyielding line, her silence serving as a shield far sharper than any blade. The train that conveyed them westward rumbled with an undeniable sense of apprehension. Through its grimy windows, fleeting glimpses of the world beyond the barbed wire enclosures flashed by. Children playfully chasing chickens in sun-drenched, dusty yards, and farmers stooping low to tend their land. When at last the vast expanse of the sea met their gaze, it was a boundless, azure, and indifferent spectacle. The women exchanged hushed whispers, voicing a shared apprehension that America might prove little different from the Russia they so deeply feared, merely another immense territory eager to subjugate its adversaries. Their own officers had promised them that Allied internment facilities would shatter both body and spirit. Anna, her voice a low, steely murmur, spoke, "At best, they will offer us stale bread and confine us in pens. At worst, well, we know what they have said." Yet, what awaited them on the other side was not the brutal cruelty they had braced themselves for, but an unsettling strangeness. Camp enclosures gleamed under the afternoon sun. Barbed wire stretched taut against the backdrop of cerulean skies dotted with the languid passage of clouds. Watchtowers stood tall and unyielding, yes, but within the perimeter, an order prevailed that felt unnervingly commonplace. Wooden barracks painted with meticulous care, laundry lines strung with neat precision, and the distant sharp crack of a baseball bat echoed like a peculiar alien melody. Lisa's initial sight of the mess hall nearly shattered her carefully maintained composure. Inside, a machine hummed softly, dispensing a pale, chilled sweetness into waiting bowls. Soldiers in khaki uniforms chuckled heartily as they spooned ice cream onto plates already laden with generous portions of meat and potatoes. On the tables, rows upon rows of bottles stood, filled with a dark, gleaming liquid, their glass surfaces beaded with condensation. She recalled having seen the shape of such bottles once in a Berlin cafe before the war, discreetly passed among diplomats. Here, however, they were displayed openly, each one bearing a bold, white inscription, Coca Cola. Anna's brow furrowed deeply. "A ruse," she hissed under her breath. "Propaganda. They wish to deceive us into believing they possess compassion." Nevertheless, even she struggled to mask the way her eyes lingered on the sweating glass. An American sentry stepped forward, his voice carrying the soft, rounded vowels characteristic of the American Midwest. Heinz Meror was his name, though here, clad in his uniform, he was known simply as Henry to his fellow soldiers. His grandparents had emigrated from Bavaria, and as he regarded the German women, a flicker of something unarticulated crossed his features. He distributed trays with a practiced, detached air, but when Lise met his gaze, she perceived it. Not hostility nor triumph, but a curious, patient understanding, as if he were silently imploring them to look beyond their ingrained suspicions. Captain James Donovan observed from a short distance, arms folded, the brim of his cap casting a shadow over a faint, knowing smile. He had overseen countless arrivals, each group stepping through the gates bearing the palpable weight of dread in their posture. He recognized that precise moment, the dawning disbelief, the guarded awe, the way carefully constructed propaganda crumbled in the face of something as profoundly simple as a warm meal. He often told his men, "We wage wars with ammunition, but we secure peace with hamburgers." The first spoonful of ice cream that Lisa brought to her lips was like a fleeting dream, one she was hesitant to fully embrace. Vanilla, she thought of the word, its syllables soft, almost romantic. She had long imagined that sweetness had been irrevocably buried beneath the rubble. Here, it melted with an almost alarming speed, spreading a cool sensation across her tongue, vanishing before she could fully grasp its essence. Across the table, Anna deliberately pressed her spoon down, as though resisting an overwhelming urge to lift it. Finally, with a decisive movement, she tasted it. Her eyes flickered, a brief expression of surprise, then a surge of annoyance at her own involuntary reaction. "It is nothing," she muttered dismissively, "merely sugar and air." The Coca Cola bottle presented an even greater enigma. Lou held it with a degree of caution, as if it might suddenly detonate. The glass felt substantial in her hand, and the cap hissed audibly when it was finally pried open. She lifted it, experiencing the sensation of fizz for the first time, tiny bubbles biting at her tongue like miniature sparks. Around her, laughter erupted, as an American soldier playfully remarked, "Careful, Frayling, that's democracy in a bottle." Some of the German women offered nervous chuckles, while others responded with glares, uncertain whether the jest was intended as an insult or an invitation. As the days unfolded, these stark contrasts became even more pronounced. The internees were provided with 3 meals daily, offering more sustenance than their families back home could possibly imagine. The guards, while firm, exhibited no cruelty, engaging in casual conversations about baseball scores, movie stars, or the social gatherings planned for Saturday nights. To the women, it felt akin to stepping into an alternate reality where the war existed only as fleeting mentions in newspaper headlines. Nevertheless, the ubiquitous barbed wire served as a constant reminder that this was not true freedom, but merely a carefully metered taste of it, dispensed like a peculiar act of mercy. Anna remained steadfast in her suspicion. Her bitterness was a constant companion, a weight she refused to set aside. "They fatten us like livestock," she confided one evening in the barracks, her voice low. "Do you not comprehend? It is a display for their populace, showcasing their perceived civilization. Nothing here possesses genuine substance." But Lise could not erase the memory of the effervescent sensation against her lips, the cream dissolving into a sweetness she had never known. If this was indeed propaganda, it was crafted from flavors she now yearned to experience once more. One evening, as the twilight hues of rose and indigo began to paint the camp, Heinz lingered near the perimeter fence. He heard the German women humming a melody from their homeland, a soft, hesitant, almost mournful tune. He recognized the familiar cadence. It was a lullaby his grandmother used to sing. For a brief moment, he stood motionless, his heart caught between 2 disparate worlds. Then softly he began to whistle along from his side of the fence. The women fell silent, startled by the unexpected sound. Anna narrowed her eyes, muttering, "Traitor." But Lise tilted her head, her expression unreadable, her hands gripping the wire as if to test its resilience. The war raged on in the world outside, with Hamburg's streets reduced to rubble, and soldiers succumbing to the freezing temperatures in the east. But within the confines of the camp, the most profound shock was not the threat of violence, but the sheer abundance. Ice cream cones were passed from hands that had once painstakingly rationed meager portions of stale bread. The metallic snap of Coca Cola caps echoed in rhythm with laughter they still viewed with deep mistrust. And yet, beneath the layers of suspicion and irony, a nascent question began to form in Lisa's mind. If their supposed enemy possessed the capacity to offer such sweetness so freely, what else in the world had been deliberately withheld from her? The evening air carried a faint scent of pine and industrial oil, the steady hum of the ice cream maker drifting like an odd lullaby through the thin walls of the barracks. Lise closed her eyes, her tongue still recalling the cool, swift rush of vanilla. For the first time since her capture, the suffocating grip of fear began to loosen, but as she drifted toward a restless slumber, a guard's sharp shout echoed from the far side of the camp. Something had arrived, something that would undoubtedly serve as a stark reminder to them all that paradise, even when served in glistening scoops and sealed bottles, was destined to be fleeting. The mornings commenced with the strident clang of the mess bell, its metallic summons reverberating across the camp like an inescapable decree. The women stirred from their cots, lined with coarse blankets, their bodies still stiffened by the arduous marches and train journeys. Yet, the atmosphere within the American camp was devoid of any scent of fear, replaced instead by the earthy aroma of brewing coffee, the buttery promise of scrambled eggs, and the sweet cascade of syrup being poured over stacks of pancakes. For Lisa L. Bow, each step toward the mess hall represented a silent negotiation between the gnawing pangs of hunger and the quiet insistence of pride, her stomach urging her forward while her conscience whispered a cautionary note. Inside, the sheer abundance felt almost obscene. Platters overflowed with meatloaf, bowls contained mashed potatoes whipped to a creamy perfection, and pies boasted crusts that flaked delicately at the slightest touch of a fork. And always, waiting at the end of the line, as if centuries old, were the familiar bottles of Coca Cola. Their glass surfaces glistened with cold droplets, offering a promise of refreshment that no propaganda leaflet could ever replicate. The women accepted their trays with a posture of military stoicism, yet they ate with the eager consumption of the civilians they once were. Spoons were quickly raised to mouths, as if in fear that the bounty might vanish at any moment. Anna Hoffman remained a resolute fortress. She ate with deliberate slowness, chewing with a profound disdain, as if determined not to be conquered by sweetness. Her gaze lingered not on the food, but on the guards, meticulously observing their movements, perpetually searching for any hidden cruelty lurking beneath their smiles. She would impart sharp observations to the others. "Note the way the guard's hand rests on his rifle," she'd say, or "Observe how the spotlight from the tower sweeps the yard in precise arcs each night." She implored them, "Do not forget. A gilded cage, however sweet, remains a cage." Yet, not everyone shared her pervasive skepticism. In the afternoons, after completing their assigned chores and enduring the daily roll call, the camp would transform into something that bore a semblance of ordinary life. American officers organized various classes, including English lessons, sewing workshops, and even lectures on the principles of democracy. For the men, there were labor assignments outside the camp perimeter, but for the women, the hours drifted by in a state of peculiar freedom. They would braid each other's hair, stitch together torn garment hems, or simply sit by the barracks windows, observing distant baseball games. The sharp crack of the bat served as a foreign, rhythmic music, joyous and resonant, echoing against the wire fence as if mocking its very purpose. Lise found herself captivated not by the intricate rules of the game, but by its palpable energy. She watched the players sprint in energetic loops, their faces alight with laughter that seemed to exist entirely outside the context of war. One afternoon, Heinz Mellor stood nearby, his cap tilted back, attempting to explain in his halting German, "You see, 3 strikes and you are out. But if you run swiftly, you are safe." His words possessed an accidental poetry, and Lise found herself smiling, despite her reservations. Anna, overhearing the exchange, scoffed dismissively. "Safe in this place?" She turned away, but the corner of her mouth betrayed a fleeting hint of envy at Lisa's newfound ease. The numbers themselves underscored the profound contradictions. Back in their homeland, ration books dictated every aspect of daily life, with a meager 800 calories per day considered fortunate. Here, the internees consumed more than 3,000 calories. Leah remembered her mother's letters, the ink smudged with desperation, tales of bread extended with sawdust, and children collapsing in schoolrooms. Each bite of pie consumed within the camp was burdened by a heavy guilt, a sweetness inextricably laced with sorrow. She meticulously composed her own correspondence, carefully omitting any mention of ice cream or soda, knowing that the truth would inflict a deeper wound than any weapon. Nevertheless, truth had a way of seeping in. One evening, after supper, she sat outside the barracks, slowly sipping from a bottle of Coca Cola. The effervescence tickled her throat, the bubbles rising like laughter she had long forgotten how to produce. She tilted her head back, watching the sunset paint the sky in vibrant streaks of copper and violet. For a transient moment, she felt suspended between two vastly different worlds, the desolate ashes of Europe and this improbable oasis of plenty. Anna joined her reluctantly, her arms folded, her gaze sharp and scrutinizing. "You are forgetting yourself," she warned, her voice laced with concern. Lace responded quietly, "Perhaps I am remembering who I once was." Camp life began to blur the established boundaries between captivity and the semblance of ordinary existence. Music spilled from radios housed in the guard huts, lively swing tunes with brassy trumpets that lifted spirits even when the lyrics remained incomprehensible. On some nights, the Americans organized dances, inviting civilian volunteers from nearby towns to socialize with the prisoners. The women observed from the shadows, the infectious rhythm tugging at their bones, a poignant reminder of youth seemingly squandered on uniforms. Lee swayed almost unconsciously, and Anna caught her shoulder, gripping it with the firm tenacity of an anchor. "Do not allow them to seduce you," she hissed, her voice urgent. But even Anna's eyes lingered momentarily on the sight of spinning skirts, on the uninhibited joy of strangers who had never experienced the terror of falling bombs. Rumors circulated as freely as the smoke from the campfires. Some men eagerly embraced re-education classes, fascinated by discussions of freedom and individual rights. Others remained defiant, clinging to their established ideology as if it were a life raft. The women found themselves positioned between these two extremes, uncertain which path to embrace. Lise felt the compelling tug of curiosity, the perilous allure of believing in human kindness. Anna, however, clung fiercely to defiance, convinced it was the only remaining shield available to her. Surveillance was a constant presence. Searchlights swept across the barracks at night, and the crunch of boots along patrol paths was a perpetual sound. The watchtowers loomed like silent, impassive judges. Yet, within these confined boundaries, life began to bloom in unexpected, defiant ways. One woman painstakingly painted scenes of her homeland onto scraps of cardboard. Another composed poignant poems reflecting on the sheer absurdity of finding ice cream within a prison. Humor sparked like flint striking steel. They playfully nicknamed Coca Cola soft war juice and shared quiet laughter at the irony of consuming the enemy's symbol of pride from glass bottles. Even Anna, on one occasion, managed a fleeting smile, though she quickly buried it beneath her habitual scowl. Lee began to grasp that survival in this environment was not solely about enduring hunger or violence, but rather about navigating an overwhelming abundance without losing one's sense of self. Sweetness, she realized, was as potentially dangerous as bullets, for it blurred the critical line between enemy and benefactor. Each sip of soda seemed to soften her resistance. Each spoonful of ice cream melted away her suspicion. She wrestled with the pervasive guilt of enjoying these pleasures, the sense of betrayal it seemed to represent, and yet the fragile thread of hope it also carried. One night, lying on her cot, she listened to the distant hum of the ice cream machine, a sound as steady and reassuring as a heartbeat. The noise was incongruous in its comfort, yet it lulled her, weaving its way into her dreams, conjuring images of lush gardens and unrestrained laughter. She awoke to Anna's voice in her ear, sharp and unwavering in its certainty. "They wish for you to forget the devastation," Anna declared, "but the devastation is all that awaits us." Lee turned her face toward the window. Beyond the imposing wire fence, the guard towers glowed like vigilant, watchful eyes. She thought of Heinz's clumsy attempts at German, of Donovan's wry smile, of the sweetness that dissolved far too quickly on her tongue. She found herself unable to decide which posed the greater threat, the physical fences that confined her body, or the overwhelming abundance that threatened to ensnare her heart. Then, in the profound hush that preceded the dawn, a new sound broke the established rhythm of camp life, the deep roar of trucks arriving just beyond the perimeter. Headlights swept across the barracks, blinding and sudden, casting elongated shadows over the cots. The women sat bolt upright, their breathing quickening, scattered trays of half-finished letters falling to the floor. Orders were barked in English, and the urgent thud of boots striking the ground punctuated the air. Something had arrived, and with it, the fragile illusion of sweetness began to shudder. The women exchanged glances, their hearts tightening with a shared apprehension. Whatever sense of solace the ice cream and Coca Cola had seemed to offer was about to be severely tested, and none could yet ascertain whether this unexpected comfort had rendered them stronger or merely more vulnerable. The trucks that had thundered into the camp did not disgorge executioners or shackles, but rather crates, an endless towering array of supplies that carried a faint, distinct aroma of cardboard and sugar. The women watched as the soldiers unloaded them, their khaki shirts darkening with sweat, their laughter easy and unguarded. The boxes bore the familiar, elegant cursive letters, Coca Cola. Alongside these, they also delivered tins of ripe peaches, sacks of fine flour, and barrels brimming with rich coffee. It served as a stark reminder that, while Europe languished in decay, this country overflowed with prosperity. This abundance not only filled the women's bowls, but also began to unsettle their loyalties, planting unsettling questions within the quiet solitude of their nights. Lisa Lott Bauer felt those questions stirring within her chest with each subsequent sip of soda. She no longer recoiled from the effervescence, but rather welcomed it, the bubbles prickling her throat like sparks of something dangerously vibrant and alive. She found herself laughing more frequently, her smile uncoiling whenever she witnessed Heinz Maller's fumbling attempts at German explanations, or when the infectious strains of swing music spilled from a nearby radio. And with every laugh that escaped her, guilt followed close behind, sharp and piercing as broken glass. Her letters home became increasingly difficult to write. How could she possibly confess to her mother that captivity provided her with better sustenance than freedom ever had? Anna Hoffman observed this subtle shift and reacted with profound disdain. She sharpened her words into weapons, striking out at Lise and anyone else whose gaze softened toward their captors. "Do you truly believe kindness can erase the impact of bombs?" she snapped one evening, her voice slicing through the quiet barracks. "They destroy our cities by day and then attempt to charm us with sugar by night. It is nothing more than a theatrical performance. And you," her gaze fixed intently on Lise, "are the audience they so desperately crave." The other women shifted uneasily, unwilling to openly align themselves with either perspective, their loyalties fracturing in subtle, silent ways. The camp itself seemed to conspire in fostering this internal division. The Americans organized lectures where the prisoners could learn about democracy, freedom of speech, and even the practical mechanics of elections. Some of the men attended with eager anticipation, meticulously scribbling notes and posing earnest questions. Others scoffed openly, muttering dismissively that it was nothing more than blatant brainwashing. For the women, the choice was far more nuanced, but no less fraught with consequence. To listen implied an admission of curiosity. To refuse meant maintaining steadfastness, but at the cost of remaining spiritually empty. Lise attended one such lecture, sitting discreetly at the back, her ears prickling at unfamiliar phrases such as rights of the individual and government by the people. She had been meticulously taught only the chorus of unquestioning obedience. These new concepts struck her as startlingly strange. That night, she confessed her feelings to Heinz, who lingered near the wire, a cigarette glowing between his fingers. "It sounded different," she admitted softly, her voice barely a whisper. "As if life could belong to me, not solely to commands." Heinz exhaled a plume of smoke into the twilight. "That's the idea," he said simply. His accent rendered the German words awkwardly, but the sincerity in his eyes remained unwavering. Leigh looked down at the ground, a flicker of fear crossing her mind that Anna might be observing them, yet a part of her longed to hold on to that simple sentence, much like she would clutch a bottle of soda with both hands, terrified of letting it slip. Anna's resistance deepened with every sign of wavering she detected in others. She gathered a small, devoted circle around her, women who whispered darkly about traitors and vowed to return home utterly unchanged. They would recount stories of German victories long since relegated to history, clinging to rumors that sustained their pride. "Better rubble than chains," Anna insisted, her voice carrying the weighty conviction of someone who refused to surrender, even to the insidious allure of kindness. But her unwavering conviction began to tremble at night when she dreamt of burning Berlin streets and awoke to the comforting scent of cinnamon wafting from the American kitchen. Holidays served to further blur the already indistinct line between captivity and a cruel parody of normalcy. At Christmas, the Americans adorned the mess hall with festive garlands, erected a tree festooned with popcorn, and even distributed small tokens of appreciation. Bars of soap, candy, and cigarettes. On each table, bottles of Coca Cola stood proudly, their red caps adorned with miniature paper Santa hats. The women stared at them in stunned silence, the sheer absurdity almost unbearable. Some managed nervous laughter, while others openly wept. Leah raised her bottle cautiously, the effervescence popping like tiny sleigh bells in her ears. "Frolisches Fest," Heinz said gently from across the room, his voice imbued with a warmth that startled her. Anna clenched her fists, outright refusing the offered bottle. Later, she muttered, "Do not allow them to rewrite the true meaning of Christmas. Do not let them make you forget." The internal conflict intensified with the arrival of letters from home. They spoke of pervasive hunger, of clandestine black markets, and of children so frail they could barely stand. Lisa's sister wrote that their mother was rationing her own meager portions to ensure the youngest child survived. Reading these words, Lee felt the immense weight of the pie she had consumed mere hours earlier settle like lead in her stomach. She longed to send sustenance through the envelope, to trade every drop of soda for a single crust of bread in her mother's hands. Instead, she folded the letter with meticulous care, tucking it beneath her pillow, and ate in silent shame the following day, her appetite thoroughly spoiled. Yet, shame alone was insufficient to silence her burgeoning curiosity. One evening, Benny Goodman's music filled the air, the clarinet soaring through the camp like a bold dare. Lou allowed herself a slight, unconscious sway, her body remembering the joy of dancing before the imposition of uniforms. Anna noticed and seized her wrist, her grip tight. "Do you aspire to be American?" she hissed, her voice laced with suspicion. Lee met her gaze, taken aback by the vehemence of the question. "I wish to be human," she whispered back, her voice trembling. The unspoken words lingered, a tangible weight between them. "Hazardous and delicate," he'd stated, and for the first time, Anna found herself without a ready quip. A glint of humor still flickered, though it was now laced with a sharper edge. The women shared light-hearted banter about their diets, jesting they had returned to Germany as plump as pastries while their families starved. They christened the ice cream maker the miracle apparatus, and playfully ribbed Heinz about having to explain the intricacies of baseball for what felt like the 100th occasion. Even Anna managed a chuckle when an old non-commissioned officer grumbled that Germany hadn't lost the war to enemy armaments, but rather to the allure of vanilla ice cream. Yet, this mirth was as fragile as spun glass, poised to shatter. Beneath its thin veneer lay the stark realization that every moment of pleasure was a betrayal of the devastation that awaited them across the vast expanse of the ocean. The sharp lines of barbed wire dissected the horizon, a constant visual cue that all sweetness came with implicit conditions. Sentries patrolled their beats diligently, their searchlights sweeping the grounds, and the regulations remained unyielding. The sight of a prisoner returned, bruised and bleeding, after an escape attempt, effectively silenced any lingering levity, despite the fact that he received medical attention. This grim spectacle served as a stark reminder to the women that compassion could not negate authority, and that the refreshing taste of Coca Cola could not erode the formidable barriers of their confinement. For Lee, it was a sobering jolt. For Anna, it was validation of her persistent warnings. "You see," she declared to the assembled women in their living quarters, "the sugar is merely a means to dull your senses. The wire, that is the unvarnished truth." Nevertheless, even Anna couldn't entirely quell the burgeoning doubts forming in the minds of others. What if the reality of their situation was more complex? Could kindness and cruelty truly coexist, each possessing an equal measure of validity and undeniable presence? Lee lay awake through the long nights, her heart a battlefield of conflicting emotions, torn between lingering guilt and the tantalizing prospect of a different future. She conjured images of her mother receiving much-needed parcels of sustenance, envisioned herself walking free, charting her own course in the world. Yet, Anna's voice, fierce and resolute, echoed in her memory. To embrace benevolence, Anna argued, was to betray those who remained loyal, to diminish the enduring memory of those enduring hardship back home. The chasm between these opposing viewpoints widened with each passing day. The camp became divided by an invisible yet palpable rift. Some gravitated towards burgeoning curiosity, while others clung tenaciously to their defiance. Between these factions stretched a silence thick with an almost palpable suspicion. Heinz, too, felt this disquiet, his footsteps growing heavier as he patrolled, his gaze often lingering on Lee with a subtle, unspoken concern. Captain Donovan, observing the unfolding dynamics with his characteristic cool detachment, noted in his official records that the women grappled more with matters of loyalty than with the pangs of hunger. He recognized it as a silent conflict, a struggle waged subtly, moment by moment. As spring tentatively asserted itself, delicate blossoms bloomed beyond the confines of the wire, their faint fragrance occasionally drifting into the barracks. Life, indifferent in its grace, pressed onward. The women watched new buds unfurl, their own allegiances growing increasingly entangled and precarious, as delicate and contested as the very flowers gracing the landscape. Lee once stooped to retrieve a fallen petal that had drifted through the fence. As she held it gently in her palm, Anna's gaze met hers. In Lee's eyes, there was wonder. In Anna's, a solemn warning. That night, as the camp surrendered to the enveloping darkness, news arrived, scrawled on a contraband scrap of paper, passed secretly from one prisoner to another. Germany was faltering, its cities aflame, its military fronts collapsing. The women absorbed the words in hushed silence, the implications heavy with an undeniable inevitability. Anna's fingers tightened around the note, her jaw set in a rigid line. Lee felt her breath hitch, the lingering sweetness of Coca Cola still on her tongue. If the war was unraveling, then the gates of their confinement would soon swing open. But to what awaited them on the other side? This question struck her with a force more profound than any explosive device. As she closed her eyes, the effervescence still danced on her lips, and she grasped a profound truth. The true prison was not the wire. It was a choice, one she would soon be compelled to make. The spring of 1945 dawned not with the vibrant arrival of blossoms, but with the pervasive spread of rumors. These whispers traveled through tattered newspapers, in hushed fragments of radio broadcasts, and in the restless, watchful silence of guards whose laughter had become noticeably less frequent. For months, the camp had existed as a peculiar enclave of relative plenty, seemingly insulated from the widespread collapse of the German Reich. However, this illusion was now rapidly dissolving. Even within the enclosure of barbed wire, the women could sense the world shifting, as if history itself had suddenly accelerated its pace toward a definitive conclusion. Lisa Lott Bauer felt this shift most acutely through the silence in her correspondence. Her mother's letters, once filled with a frantic energy, crammed with anxieties and descriptions of hunger, abruptly ceased. The final missive spoke of the blaring of sirens over Hamburg, of neighbors disappearing beneath mounds of rubble, and of children weakened by persistent hunger. No subsequent replies arrived. Day after day, Lee would check the mailbox, her hands trembling as she touched the increasingly empty space where letters should have been. While the food available within the camp sustained her body, a profound emptiness settled in her heart. She clung to the fading echoes of her mother's voice, fearing its complete disappearance. In stark contrast, Anna Hoffman's resolve hardened with every rumor of Germany's imminent defeat. Where others allowed hope or sorrow to soften their spirits, she constructed an increasingly impenetrable shield. "They are attempting to weaken us," she declared to the assembled women in their living quarters, her voice sharp as steel. "They desire our gratitude so that when Germany falls, we forget our true identity. Do not permit them to triumph within these walls as well." Yet, even Anna's formidable intensity seemed to waver upon hearing reports of Berlin engulfed in flames. One night, Lee discovered her clutching a small locket in the darkness, murmuring a name she would never openly acknowledge. Beneath the hardened exterior of defiance lay a sorrow she dared not reveal. The camp itself mirrored the turbulent state of the outside world. While provisions remained plentiful, a palpable tension permeated the atmosphere among the guards. Their voices were sharper, and their radios were perpetually tuned to the news. Heinz Mayer, the German-American guard who had once explained the nuances of baseball with an almost childlike enthusiasm, now carried a palpable burden upon his shoulders. His gazes toward Lee became prolonged, tinged with an unspoken sentiment. On one occasion, as he offered her a bottle of Coca Cola, his hand lingered a fraction of a second longer than necessary as he passed it to her. Neither uttered a word, yet the space between them vibrated with all that remained unsaid. Captain Donovan continued his routines with practiced detachment, but even he displayed subtle signs of unease. He no longer made light-hearted remarks about the supposed wartime effectiveness of hamburgers. His reports became more concise, and he patrolled the camp with the measured gait of a man acutely aware of the passage of time. Lee sometimes observed him studying the prisoners, not merely as captives, but as individuals destined for futures yet unwritten, women who would soon return to a devastated homeland, carrying with them indelible impressions of America. He seemed to ponder the narratives they would eventually share once the gates of their confinement were finally opened. Then, one morning, the official announcement was made. Germany had surrendered. The war, at least on this side of the Atlantic, had concluded. The words descended upon the camp like stones dropped into a placid pool, sending ripples of shock through every soul. The guards erupted in cheers, their rifles raised skyward, their laughter echoing across the fences. The prisoners, conversely, stood frozen, their faces pale, their eyes wide with the dawning realization that everything they had known, for better or worse, had irrevocably vanished. For Lee, the news was a perplexing duality, simultaneously a blessing and a curse. The conflict that had consumed her formative years was finally over. Yet, the prospect of returning home filled her with a profound sense of dread. Home represented a landscape of ruins, of gnawing hunger, and of a suffocating silence where her mother's voice should have been. She pressed a hand to her chest, feeling her heart race, uncertain whether the quickening pulse signified hope or sheer terror. Anna's reaction was immediate and visceral. "Do you see?" she hissed, her grip on Lisa's arm tightening with bruising intensity. "They will send us back now, back to nothingness. All of this," she gestured broadly at the camp, encompassing the abundant food, the comfortable beds, the pervasive sweetness, was merely a staged performance, designed to make us forget what truly awaits us. Do not be deceived by their smiles. Our suffering will recommence the moment we step beyond these fences. The subsequent days blurred into a whirlwind of preparations. Official directives circulated, informing the women of their impending repatriation, their return to Germany by ship. They meticulously packed their meager possessions, cherished letters, scraps of fabric, sketches created during idle afternoons. Some wept silently, while others moved with a rigid, almost automaton-like discipline. The barracks, once filled with the steady hum of daily routine, now vibrated with the immense weight of anticipation. Each woman understood, with profound clarity, that she was about to exchange a life of relative comfort for one steeped in desolation. On their final evening, the American authorities hosted a farewell supper in the mess hall. The tables groaned under the weight of an extravagant spread: roasted chicken, buttery corn, pies generously topped with cream, and, adorning the center of each table, rows of Coca Cola bottles, their glass surfaces glistening as if illuminated from within. Initially, the women sat in silent contemplation, the vast chasm between their full plates and the pervasive hunger awaiting them across the ocean seemingly unbridgeable. Then, Donovan's voice, steady and formal, cut through the quiet. "Ladies," he announced, "tomorrow you will journey home. Tonight, we share a meal as a farewell. May it serve not as a reminder of your captivity, but as a symbol of possibility." His words resonated deeply with Lee. She surveyed the women with whom she had shared her life, her gaze alighting on Anna's unyielding silhouette, and on Heinz, leaning in the doorway, his eyes unreadable. Slowly she lifted her bottle, unscrewing the cap. The sharp hiss echoed in the profound silence, a definitive release, like the liberation of something long held captive. One by one, the others followed suit, until the hall was filled with the harmonious chorus of fizzing glass. She took a sip. The bubbles danced across her tongue, a sensation both familiar and startlingly vivid, the taste of a world that seemed impossibly distant from the ruins that awaited her. Her thoughts turned to her mother, to the omnipresent hunger, to the letters that had gone silent. She recalled the subtle brush of Heinz's hand against hers, Donovan's quiet conviction. And in that moment, she understood that this sweetness was more than just sugar. It was memory. It was choice. It was a fragile, ephemeral promise of life amidst the devastation. Anna steadfastly refused her bottle until the very last moment. She sat rigidly, arms crossed, her eyes blazing. But as the silence stretched, becoming almost unbearable, she abruptly reached out, twisting the cap open with a sharp, decisive motion. She raised the bottle high, her voice piercing the stillness of the hall. "For Germany," she declared bitterly, and drank. The gesture was a complex blend of defiance and surrender, an unspoken admission that even she could not entirely resist the allure of sweetness, though she chose to mask it with palpable anger. That night, sleep offered little respite. The barracks resonated with hushed prayers, stifled sobs, and nervous, disembodied laughter. Lee lay awake, the lingering taste of her final sip still tingling on her tongue, as if it had imprinted a permanent mark. She heard footsteps pause outside their quarters, followed by Heinz's voice, soft, almost breaking. "You will see America again one day." She offered no response, but a dangerous flicker of hope surged within her, a hope she promptly buried beneath the warmth of her blanket. At the first light of dawn, the trucks arrived. The women emerged, their breaths misting in the cool morning air, their belongings clutched tightly. The guards formed a solemn line along the path, their faces now devoid of the triumphant joy of victory. Donovan stood at the gateway, his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes meticulously scanning each woman as if committing their faces to memory. As Lee passed, he offered a single, deliberate nod, an acknowledgement, a farewell, perhaps even a silent wish. Before boarding, each prisoner was presented with a final parting gift, a single bottle of Coca Cola. The glass felt cool against their palms, condensation beating on their skin. Lee held hers tightly, as if it were both an anchor and a torch. Around her, other women clutched their bottles with the reverence usually reserved for sacred relics. Anna scoffed, muttering disparagingly that it was merely sugar water, yet even she gripped her bottle as if it contained something far more significant. The trucks rumbled forward, carrying them toward the ships, toward the ruins, toward futures that none could yet fully comprehend. Lee sat with the bottle pressed against her chest, the vibrations of the engine resonating through her very bones. She closed her eyes, conjuring images of melting ice cream, of swing music drifting through the wire fences, of laughter that had unexpectedly returned when she least anticipated it. Her thoughts drifted to her mother, to the pervasive hunger, to the arduous process of rebuilding. And then she recalled the sharp hiss of the cap, the effervescence rising like an unspoken promise. As the camp receded, its fences shrinking against the distant horizon, she understood that the war had etched indelible scars upon her, scars she would carry throughout her life. Yet, in her hand, she held a symbol of something far grander than mere captivity, a memory of sweetness in the midst of profound desolation, a poignant reminder that even while ensnared, she had glimpsed a world beyond her confinement. She lifted the bottle to her lips, savoring the last lingering sip. It burned and sparkled, simultaneously too sweet and achingly fleeting, a taste that would haunt her long after the glass lay empty. And in that precise moment, as the dawn fractured the horizon with its brilliant light, Lee realized this was not an ending, but a threshold. The wire no longer held her captive. The true challenge awaited beyond its reach. The truck jolted violently. The bottle clinked against her teeth, and she swallowed with a deep, determined effort. She turned her face toward the uncertain road ahead, her eyes moist but unwavering. The world was undeniably broken, but somewhere within its desolate ruins, a promise had been forged, a promise as delicate and potent as the fizzing sensation in her throat. And though she could not yet articulate its name, she knew with absolute certainty that she would dedicate the remainder of her life to pursuing its elusive echo.